Buenas and bananas itzuos. Good morning, colleagues. Imina 27 na legislature in Guam is called to order. Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Buenas. Good morning, Madam Speaker and colleagues. I move to waive, notwithstanding Section 1.02, Sessions of a Legislature in Guam, H1, Privileges of the Floor, Persons Allowed, to permit the legislative staff from the 17th Chuk State Legislature, the student interns of the Governor's Summer Youth Employment Program, and the members of the Guam Legislature's Public Policy Institute to be on the session floor.
On that motion to waive the rules to allow those to enter our session floor, is there any objection? No. Seeing no objection, motion carries. All right. Thank you, colleagues, for waiting. We'll now proceed. Next on our agenda, welcome again to the Summer Youth Employment Program interns here at the Guam Legislature. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll begin with a prayer. Senator Taitagui, could you please lead us in prayer?
Good morning, Speaker, and good morning to my colleagues and our guest. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord, your grace brings this body together once again to maintain our course towards building a stronger Guam. With gratitude and deep humility, we ask that you guide our debates with respectful discourse, so that our words lead to policy outcomes where Guam's people are safer and moving steadily toward economic recovery and sustainability. Lord, we pray that you will lead our deliberations with the spirit of cooperation. Give us the courage to stand against those who hurt the people's trust. Impart on us the wisdom to restore faith where it's been lost. Remind us that together we are 15 members of a community, chosen to be the voice of thousands, to represent and fight for the best interest of all those rights, health, and safety our government must protect. Heavenly Father, the work we do for our people is our answer to your call to serve others. May the work we accomplish this session be done with truth and fairness, and as we carry out our commitment to build a better Guam. In your good name we pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Senator Taitagui. To express a never-ending and never-forgotten gratitude by the people of Guam, the legislature recognizes recipients of Imaladan Mas Takilu na Sakrifisu on a display in the Guam Congress building and during each of its sessions. For the recognition of a recipient of Imaladan Mas Takilu na Sakrifisu for today's session, Vice Speaker Senator Tina Muñoz Barnes, you are recognized.
On behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor Sergeant Albert Barcenas Doyle and the family of Sergeant Albert Barcenas Doyle for making the ultimate sacrifice in service and defense of our island and country.
Situs Masi, Vice Speaker. Again, we welcome the student interns of the Governor's Summer Youth Employment Program who are interning here at the legislature and the members of the Guam Legislature's Public Policy Institute. They will lead us in reciting of the Inifresi, the singing of the Guam hymn in Chamorro, and the singing of the national anthem.
Inifresi, inimastaculum gikinasoku, imastaculum gikurasonu, zanimas figu naninas inyahu, uafresem maisazu, parabai patehi, zanudi fendi, ienengi, ikotura, ilenguahi, iairi, ihanum zanitano chamon. Irin shaku diretu ginazur tata, estiu afirma yirui biblia, zani benderahu I benderem guahan. Kanogi chamoru, purita nota, kantan matunonya itoru ilugar. Parai honra, parai gloria, abibayes la sempara. Parai honra, parai gloria, abibayes la sempara. Utoru I tempu I pas, parahita, zangin langit na bendition. Contra peligro, na fan sofuam, Zeus protect ies languam. Contra peligro, stars through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets burnt clear, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Si Deus Marcy. Please be seated. Clerks, please take the roll call.
Senator Barnett, Senator Blas, Senator Brown, Senator Dueñas, Senator Fisher, Senator Lujan, Vice Speaker Munoz Barnes, Senator Parkinson, Senator Perez, Senator Kanata, Senator San Augustine, Senator San Nicolas, Senator Shelton, Senator Taitigui, Speaker Terlahi. Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Si Deus Marcy, Clerk. We are now on the call for approval of the Legislative Journal. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Sejus Masi, Madam Speaker. I move to approve the Legislative Journal dated May 28, 2024, subject to corrections.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Sejus Masi, Madam Speaker. There are communications and petitions, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On that motion to append communications and petitions, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Sejus Masi, Madam Speaker. There are messages from Imegahag Guahan, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On that motion to append messages, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, there are reports of standing committees, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal as well.
On that motion that reports of standing committees be appended, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Majority Leader, Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Sejus Masi, Madam Speaker. There are no reports of select committees. And Madam Speaker, I move that bills introduced 313-37 COR, 314-37 LS, 315-37 COR through 317-37 COR, and resolutions introduced, resolution numbers 420-37 LS through 423-37 LS and 424-37 COR through 434-37 COR be deemed to have been given their first reading.
On that motion on the first reading and the introduction and first reading of bills and resolutions, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
Thank you.
We're now on motions. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Sejus Masi, Madam Speaker. I move to excuse senators not present for today's session.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
Madam Speaker, I move that all congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions introduced today and for the remainder of this session be considered first read and adopted to allow the Legislative Council to make technical corrections and to add all senators as co-sponsors.
On that motion regarding resolutions, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're still on motions. Is there any other motion? Senator Taitigui, you are recognized.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, and my colleagues as well again. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the governor's veto of Bill 213-37, which is an act to add a new item 1 to paragraph C of section 1909 of Chapter 19 of Title I of the Guam Code annotated relative to the duties of the public auditor, I wish to place this bill into the voting file and have a discussion on the bill. To place in the voting file for an override. Thank you. Sorry, Madam Speaker.
There's a motion. The discussion on that motion or the debate on that motion will take place now. You may proceed, Senator Taitzagui.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, on March 22nd of this year, this body unanimously passed Bill 213-37, which would have imposed a small penalty on the government of Guam directors who failed to provide the public auditor accountability of data needed for the public auditor. Madam Speaker, Bill 213 was created because certain government of Guam directors repeatedly failed to provide the necessary information for the annual government-wide audit. The audit that we, the legislature, rely on for the government of Guam operating budget, which is coming up very shortly. These delays have been consistent and problematic. The bill received unanimous support from this body because we all know that it was fair and necessary. Some even said it was too lenient. On April 3rd, the governor vetoed the bill. On April 26th, I attempted to override the governor's veto. That attempt failed. The same day, not content with the override failure, the governor issued a statement on the bill. Its author and its supporters, that means each and every one of you. In her statement, the government urged me to come up with legislation that made common sense. So she's basically saying, we don't have common sense. The bill shows, and she also says that the bill shows a lack of understanding of the audit process. Madam Speaker, Bill 213 was written because certain government of Guam directors had failed to do their job. They failed to provide the information necessary for the completion of an annual government-wide audit. The legislature totally relies on this information. We all know that. Our public auditor agrees that the provisions in Bill 213 would provide an incentive for those directors to do their jobs. Madam Speaker, one thing I would never do is suggest that our esteemed public auditor lacks the understanding of the audit process. He supported this bill. He came and testified on this bill. He understands the process. But according to the governor, he doesn't understand as well. Where is the common sense in that? If I were the public auditor, I would totally take offense to such a statement. Some members of this body attended the public hearing on this bill. All members have access to the committee report issued on the bill. All members agreed that it made sense, and all voted in favor of it. You know, I'm used to the governor attacking me, but if I were a strong supporter of the governor and I was told that I voted for something that didn't make sense, I would feel insulted. I will not stand by and accept that we are swayed for no substantial reason other than because the governor said so. We are a separate body. This is not an appointed office. It is an elected one by the people. And we do a disservice to the people who have placed their vote of confidence in us to make decisions on behalf and not the governors, on behalf of them and not the governors. Colleagues, let the people know who you serve today. If it's the people of Guam, then you will vote yes on this override. If you vote no, you have made it clear you do not stand for the people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the motion to place vetoed bill number 213 into the voting file for override, is anyone else like to speak? Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I certainly rise in support of the override of this bill. You know, it's very difficult to go out to the people as we are now in the next few months leading up to the primary election and the general election. And we talk about the importance of transparency. We talk about accountability in the government. You know, those are the new keywords we use these days. But when the time comes to make the decision to make sure that that's really what's happening in the government of Guam, why do we sense there's going to be resistance to that? And the governor's decided, oh, no. She's refusing to hold her directors responsible. And that's the key issue here. The fact that this bill exists is telling because the governor herself chooses not to hold her directors accountable, to make sure they do their job. And one of the requirements of running a department and agency is making sure that you have this information ready every year, same time, same place, to the same person, the public auditor. And that's important so that when we go into session to address the budget for the incoming fiscal year, that we have that information available for us. We talk about the need to ensure that we have audited information. You know, we're always doing, you know, all the extra money we think we have, and we're passing bills and putting all that appropriation language. But we really don't know if that money is going to exist until the audits are done, which is the following year. And so here we are again, and I sense, you know, my good colleague from Tamuning's frustration, because she's almost assuming, as I am, that, you know, we all jump up and down, we'll vote for the bill the first round, then the governor vetoes it, and then when the time comes, we already know how those votes line up. Because the governor doesn't want it. And then, gosh, we're not going to do what the governor doesn't want. But we work for the people, right? I don't know why. I've never had to say that so much on the floor in a single term. Who do we really work for? Well, we'll know when the votes come down. Because this legislature, when it comes to the vote, we might have the majority that says, yeah, you know, this is what we need to do. But when the time comes for the override, we don't override. So the governor makes sure she never gets legislation she doesn't want, but then at the other end, she has difficulty getting legislation she does want. And that's how I've seen it play this term, and we're what, 6 months, 18 months into this term? Do we think we're going to change our spots? Directors don't turn their reports, their financial reports, on time. And this is an extreme thing to say, oh, we have to penalize you for not doing your job. But you know, one thing I've noticed, the administration doesn't rein in directors that don't do their job. And even when they move them, because there's a lot of public criticism, they just move them somewhere else. But I'll tell you, I bet if the Republican administration was still in office dragging their feet, oh my goodness, we'd be jumping up and down to make sure we pass this bill. Yeah, let's find those directors. But the reality is the responsibility of accounting for the money that they manage, they're dragging their feet. You know, colleagues, since we had that briefing by the public auditor, not even a couple weeks ago, and I appreciate his effort to come down here and let us know formally that FEMA is questioning $34.7 million of expenditure. That's a pretty big chunk of change, $34.7 million. And then we find out, oh, there's about a little more than $8 million that was supposed to be reimbursed back to the government of Guam. Did that information come from the governor's office? In all these, you know, long memos and letters they like to write to us, did they mention that by any chance over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Well, anything prior to that, I wasn't here, but do you think those of you that were here prior, did they kind of let you know that we may owe the federal government $34.7 million? We were just here a little over 3 weeks ago. You know, our budget people sat up here in the front row. You know, they're the two key budget people in the administration. Did we say when we were debating the power credit bill? Did we ask? Did one of us ask? Did two, maybe three of us ask the question? Are there any outstanding obligations we have that we might need to address this year? Any concern before we appropriate $30 million for the power credit? We just have a little, what, 40 plus million left? What did you hear, colleagues? What did the people of Guam hear, colleagues? Did they say, Hungan? Yes. By the way, FEMA notified us we may owe $34.7 million because we can't account, we can't justify, or we don't have the records to demonstrate that we properly spent this money. Did that come out? Did you hear that? Can we replay the tape, the record? No, the response was no, ahi, nothing, no, 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 and no. Is that how we operate government finances? I mean, what you do if your personal money is your business, I don't care, that's your money. What you do with the public's money is a little different. Because I don't hear people out there telling me that don't matter to them. Especially when there's still a lot of people out there, in spite of all the money that's flushed through this government, that are struggling. Do you hear that when you go to the graduation parties, the mocktails, run into people, you know, and I run into Senator Frank at Happy Mart? Do they tell you that doesn't matter to them because they can't even fathom what $100 sometimes look like, or $1,000 or $50,000? Least of all, $34.7 million. That just sort of slipped the administration. And this issue's been going on for quite some time. God, it had to have been going on before 2 years ago, before the election. Did they come forth and say, hey, guys, you know, there's been some mismanagement here, and we're going to do something about it because we're the agents of change. And we're going to correct it. You know, when they say agents of change, I think just a gust of wind should come flowing in with them. Their hair should move. But no, they didn't bring that up, did they? It just sort of slipped. We just sweep that under the rug. We don't talk about those things. We don't talk about mismanagement in our administration. And they go, oh, but that started since the last administration, Calvo Tenorio. Well, you know what, folks? 6 years later, you know, that's your responsibility. What have you done about it? What did you do to correct it? If you knew about it, what did you do about it? The fact they've never acknowledged it and disclosed it is bothersome. And who brought it to our attention? Was it the governor's office? Was it Homeland Security? Did they put their big boy shoes on and say, hey, and big girl shoes and said, hey, we've made some mistakes here, and we're going to correct it. And this is what we're going to do to correct it. Did they do any of those things, colleagues? No, 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 and no. I'm just talking because I'm going to motion my bill after this. I guess I could blend my comments. You recall last year when Mayor Jesse Allig, our good mayor from PD, was here? You know, Mayor Jesse Allig, who has the most infectious laugh. I don't even know what he can be laughing about, but I laugh with him because he's just got that laugh. He's just got that personality. Makes you joyous. Well, he wasn't laughing at us last year when he came in here right after Typhoon Mawar and talked about the fact that he and his village residents were depleting whatever resources they had to help recover from the typhoon. And he brought to us, as the head of the Mayor's Council, the challenge that he and his fellow mayors were saddled with after the typhoon to try to help their people to get the most basic thing, even drinking water. You remember that, colleagues? All of a sudden, Mayor Jesse wasn't laughing and he wasn't smiling at us. And he was mad, and deservedly so. And we were unimpressed, those of us that have been at this a while, those of us that have actually responded to natural disasters, like my good friend and colleague here from Barrigada, Senator Frank Blas, who's worked up at Homeland. The dismal and slow response of our local government to respond to the needs of our people during a time of their greatest need. Not that many of them didn't have power, of course, they didn't have water. They didn't have the basic things they needed to even get out of their driveway. And the government was slow in responding. And those of us that have been around the block know that was a slow response. Now I gotta wonder, is the reason we were slow in responding to that emergency is because, whoa, wait a minute, FEMA questioned our expenditures. We don't even know if FEMA is continuing to fund the employees at Homeland Security. Because we've never had to ask that question, because we've always known. Homeland, federally funded. It's not even on the agenda. Our budget chair doesn't even, there's no oversight hearing. There's no hearing for the budget because it's federally funded. But do we know how they're being paid right now? I hope the oversight chair now does something to hold a hearing on that issue. And if they're getting paid by local funds, do you recall appropriating local funds for that purpose? Did it register in any of our minds that we had an oversight hearing or a budget hearing for Homeland Security? But when the time comes to hold those in government responsible for their performance, or shall we say their lack of performance, we do nothing. Why am I assuming we're doing nothing, unless you're going to shock me and say, oh yes, directors and the administration should be held accountable. You know, colleagues, don't assume, and I've never, I've lesson learned. I've watched other colleagues over the years. Don't assume that the public doesn't care or they're not aware. I'm actually surprised. There are more people watch this legislative session than I've ever thought watch. Because when I was out of the legislature, I didn't watch the legislature very much. Just thought, oh my goodness, I'm not there, I don't want to hear it. But there are a lot of our people, a lot of government employees that are sitting in their government agencies, sometimes with their little earphones on because they don't want other people there to know they're listening. But they're listening. And do they want the government to be responsible? Do they want to ensure that their money is being spent in there? Of course they do. Because they look around and they see all the things that they don't have the support, that they don't see us making that investment. And do they want us to be accountable? Of course they do. Do they want the people in the administration that they voted for to be accountable? Of course they do. Do they want department directors that are supposed to execute their responsibilities, that have control over their money, to be responsible? Of course they do. So do you think we should, in making the decision, since most of us here, all of us in here, gosh, we must love it. We're all running for re-election or election for something. Should we be accountable? Of course we should. Will we be? I don't know. We'll see how we vote. But I don't think this is an unreasonable expectation. Actually, this is a deterrent. I'm not intending to go, a director, you got to pay the money out of your pocket. I'm just expecting them to do their job. These agents of change that were supposed to do remarkable things. But when you can't do basic responsibilities of ensuring that your financial reports are provided to the public auditor and to the people of Guam in a timely fashion, and when you continue to delay year after year, then by all means we should do something. That is our job. No apologies involved in doing our job. So with that, Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this bill. I'm hopeful that my colleagues will do the right thing and not just talk about accountability and transparency in government, but actually ensure the mechanisms in law are in place to ensure that those that are entrusted with the operations and the money of the people properly account and properly spend that money. And the only way we can guarantee that is to ensure those audit reports are turned in a timely fashion, and that when the time comes, which is where we're at now, to address the budget for the new fiscal year, we and the people of Guam have the information that we all need to make the decision for the upcoming budget year. With that, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to rise in support of this bill and its override.
Jesus Massey, Senator. On the motion to place Bill number 213 to the voting file for override, is there anyone else who would like to speak? Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too rise in support of an override of Bill 213-37. You know, one thing that you learn when you follow the gentle lady from Pago Bay, not only is she articulate, but she covers just about every point that you want to cover. So that all you're left to say is ditto. But let me qualify some of the remarks and the statements that she made. You know, the Office of the Public Auditor, the Office of Public Accountability was formed, it's not by this body, so that there is an assurance to the people, the taxpayers, our bosses, that not just our finances, but the way the government operates is the way that it should. And that the monies that are being utilized are spent legally, with integrity, with efficacy, and you know, it's his job every once in a while to have to step on toes and to say, that's not right. And sometimes, while the truth hurts, we just don't want to accept it and we want to be able to let it go away. But not in this case. We can't. We can't afford to do that. And just like, the gentle lady had mentioned in her presentation, just within the last few weeks, the information on the investigations and the report and the inquiries that that office has made into government and finances and how it was misspent, and in some cases spent with questionable authority, was an eye-opener. It should have been an eye-opener. Because the information can really put us in a bind. But you know what? That was 6-7 years ago. That's not today, because today we just have millions of dollars that we can spend and not have to worry about justifying it. And how dare an individual who was mandated to be able to look into these practices, into this spending, how dare he raise the flag? How dare he say the expenditures were wrong? How dare he say that there could have been criminal activity in it. I want you to think, because just like very recently he came out with a report showing that not just was there $34 million in questionable costs, but there were an additional $8 million in unauthorized costs. I want you to dig a little deeper in that, because then who certified that? Who said that it was okay to be able to do this? Who said it was okay to go ahead and spend the people's money without the people's authorization? Last time I checked, that was a crime. But you know what? How dare he say that? He's got, that office has got both a thankful and a thankless job, depending on what side of the coin you're at. And for us not to provide him not just the tools and the means and the finances and the resources to continue to do what he needs to do in a nonpartisan way. And I'm going to emphasize that because it's nonpartisan. Before he became the public auditor, we knew what side of the political aisle he sat in. But that didn't deter him today from doing the job he needs to do. That will not deter that office to do the job that they need to continue to do. What we should not do is deter him from continuing to do his job. So, not only do I stand in support of the override of this bill, but I also stand in support in the override of a relative bill, which I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to present and bring before the body again. I'm going to say this one more time. I've said it before. What's right is not always popular. And what's popular, it's not always right. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Senator, on the motion to place veto bill number 213 to the voting file for override, is there anyone else who would like to be recognized? Senator Barnett, you're recognized.
Good morning to my colleagues, and good morning to the viewing public. One of the previous speakers was right. This 37th term of the Guam Legislature really has been must-see TV, so I want to thank everybody who is watching us this morning from Malessa all the way up to Jigo. And I, too, rise in support of this override attempt. I believe it's the second. The second override attempt. And it's happened a few times in this term where we've passed a bill with unanimous or just about unanimous support, and the bill, when sent over to the governor's office, has been sent back with a big VETO on it. And then I've watched as the support for these bills that we've managed to pass into laws dwindles, and then we've failed on, I think, a few override attempts in this term. And the lines have really always been drawn by the office of the governor, which again is unfortunate. The previous speaker had also said that people are paying attention, and they are. And I think what has happened over the course of this term, at least just from my perspective, is we started out embracing our independence, our co-equality as a separate but equal branch of government. But as the politics took hold of the body, we've really struggled to, in my opinion, do even basic things to hold our government accountable. And I believe that this Bill 213 is one of those basic things. We all listened intently when the public auditor was in here on several committee of the wholes, and he kind of sounded like when your grandpa's scolding you or your Nino's scolding you, I told you guys to need that by this time, and he's not getting it, and he looked like he was going to pull out his hair. I mean, he was talking about they set a meeting, these directors set a date, and then they don't adhere to the date that they actually asked for, and this happens over and over and over and over again. So I believe the bill is common sense. I believe the bill is common sense. I believe the veto message was nonsense. And I don't want this nonsense to interfere with our ability to really, again, it's just basic accountability, holding these directors accountable. And I know that much was made, even here when we debated this bill, about the amount of money we would want to fine these directors for not getting the information, not getting the documents in time. And I remember some of us were taken aback. I think someone had proffered $500, right? And eventually we settled on $250. And in the veto message, they made a big deal out of it. But I'm just going to say, people watch, people pay attention, and what people said about that was, Lanaet, we're freaking out about $250, and many of these directors are getting $30,000 raises. $30,000 raises. $30,000 in raises over the past 2 years for the Director of Administration. $35,000 in raises for the President, CEO of the Guam Visitors Bureau. And yesterday I took my son snorkeling at the beach. Lana, we couldn't even rinse off afterwards because there's no water coming out. The bathroom's all locked. So Duram Fumansi, we're doing everything fancy, but the basic things, we struggle. We struggle to provide our people. And this bill is one of those basic things, basic accountability. Do your job. Turn in your paperwork on time. So, I mean, it is what it is. I was just reading, and some of us in here are not the only ones scratching our head when we get a bill that passes unanimously and then it is vetoed, sent back down here, and then we fail to override the veto. Just looking at a media report, and it said something like, unanimously passed bill isn't veto-proof after all. So, I mean, people scratch their heads when they see this stuff, and when you see where the lines are and who voted against the override attempt, I think it's pretty clear where the loyalties lie. And I've said this a million times on this floor over the last 18 months, and I'll say it again. We were elected to be loyal to the people of Guam and not to any governor, lieutenant governor, or any other elected official. So again, I humbly ask for my colleagues' support. I know this is going to be a very fiery session, so everybody watching, stay tuned. There's some very controversial bills on this agenda that I think are going to bring a lot of good discussion and debate. And I think it's interesting that we are talking about this override attempt because I think these alliances and these allegiances and where these votes lie, you're going to see a lot of things moving this week, and a lot of head scratching is going to happen. So thank you, Madam Speaker, and again, I rise in full support of this override attempt, and I hope that it gets the support it had on its initial passage by the body. So, Sijus Masi.
Sijus Masi, Senator. On the motion to place vetoed bill number 213 to the voting file for override, is there anyone else who would like to speak? If not, then the sponsor may close on the motion. Senator Taitakui.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I ask my colleagues to remind themselves, and even throughout this session this week, there are a lot of contentious bills that are on the floor. But this particular bill, I ask you to remind yourself, who do you work for? Who voted you in office? and who will vote you again in this upcoming election? It'll be the people. Just remember that. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I again move this bill into the voting file for an override.
All right. On the motion to place veto bill number 213 to the voting file, notwithstanding the objections of the Hagan Guahan. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're still in motions. Is there any other motion? Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd also like to make a motion, notwithstanding the governor's veto, to place in the voting file bill number 227-37, an act to amend section 1909I of chapter 19, title 1, Guam Code Annotated, relative to enhancing the independent status of the Office of Public Accountability by continuously appropriating 1/4 or 0.25 of 1% of the government of Guam's annual budget to the OPA. And I would like to have this bill in the voting file, Madam Speaker.
You may discuss that motion, Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I don't think Senator Tello should feel too bad about the governor's veto of her bill. So, I look at Senator Tello's bill that got vetoed, in case she didn't notice. When the governor vetoed my bill, the veto message, the veto is even bigger. So she must not like me even more than she doesn't like Senator Tello. The humor in all of this. It's very much a similar issue, Madam Speaker, with regards to Bill 227. And, the public auditor kind of pointed that out quite clearly just not too long ago about the timing. And, I have to tell you the irony of all of this. When they say politics makes strange bedfellows, I used to wonder, what does that mean? Are we fluffing the pillows or what? Politics make strange bedfellows. The good Honorable B.J. Cruz, you got to admit, his accomplishments are unprecedented. Not just an attorney, but judge, justice, chief justice, senator, speaker. There are a lot of accolades that were placed on the good Honorable B.J. Cruz when he stepped down to run for public auditor. And I myself, I've had my days. We've been on the opposite sides of the aisle. There's some issues we've not agreed on. And I have to admit, B.J. Cruz is a formidable opponent. So imagine me, Republican Joanne Brown, former colleague of Senator B.J. Cruz, standing on the floor of the Guam Legislature advocating for something that we both mutually agree about: the independence of the Office of Public Accountability. And the public auditor kind of pointed it out recently, the timing of the veto of this bill came around the same time, going back to Homeland Security, Civil Defense/Civil Defense, and use that as a very clear example of why his office needed independence. The governor in her veto message said, but the office is going to get a little more this year and that year, and who's the public auditor going to be accountable to? Who's watching the public auditor? Well, the people of Guam are watching the public auditor, because people of Guam vote for the public auditor, like people of Guam vote for the Attorney General. Even though she used this particular bill as a vehicle to attack, the good old Attorney General. I don't know if she doesn't like him more, or me more, or Senator Tello more. But this was a vehicle to do it, and that was, her agenda here with this veto message. And I'll tell you, I've never gotten a report like we did when the public auditor voluntarily came down here to let us know and have his staff work over the weekend on a Monday to let us know a couple weeks ago what was happening up at Homeland Security/Civil Defense. Because I'll tell you, I've worked for 2 governors. You know what the response would have probably been if I was running that agency? I wouldn't wait. I'd be signing my letter of resignation. I wouldn't wait for the governor to say, whoa, Joanne, what the heck are you doing up there? Or what are you not doing right? But what do we get from the administration about this whole issue? Do you hear anything besides the bells ringing at the cathedral? Do you hear anything? Did there writers up there that love to write press releases and veto messages, did they acknowledge what happened at Homeland? Did they take accountability for what happened up there on the Hill? Do you hear anything? Are you reading anything? Silence. You know, as they say, the silence is deafening. It's so silent. Not even a pip or squeak. Because when we don't want unpopular things known, we say nothing about them, we just ignore them. Or as our good member of the Toronto Land Trust mentioned the other day, we close our eyes, which I like better than saying we're blind to. We just close our eyes and we don't see it, and it goes away magically. Because I'm looking forward to that oversight hearing, I'll tell you. If there are government officials that have put our people in jeopardy and the ability to ensure, and not just now and in the future, that we get the support we need during our time of greatest need, when we're responding to natural disasters, or God forbid, we have a man-made disaster, that it doesn't affect our ability to get federal resources here. Because I'll tell you, that response last year took a while to get geared up. But you know what? We're not supposed to be figuring out how to do our job when we're in our job. That's why we get hired. That's why we get the promotions, because we're supposed to know what to do, including managing the money. We have close to $1 billion, if not over that, combined with federal money going into this government. Largest budget in the history of the government of Guam. Money's falling from the sky. We can't appropriate it fast enough and put our names on it because, hey, no, election, I'm going to make sure they know I did this. Yeah. I'm there for you people of Guam. I'm appropriating. God, you know, it's a lot of heavy lifting, right? Oh, God, so heavy. You're going to work out. But once again, my dear colleagues, we're here back asking for accountability in the government. More the reason, be it now our current public auditor, B.J. Cruz, or any future public auditor that runs, they should have that independence. They should not have to worry about, ooh, are they going to cut my budget? Are they going to veto my budget? Because I'm not worried about the accountability, the Office of Accountability, because the people of Guam will decide if that individual that's in that position is being responsible and doing their job properly. And I'm not worried. The legislature still has the ability to call the public auditor in and have a conversation, have a round table, have an oversight. We can subpoena the public auditor if we need to. But to say this small little portion of the budget that can ensure that our money, the people's money, is being properly spent, should not be given to the Office of the Public Auditor, who has come out and stated that, you know what, on the slow years when there's less money, yes, my office should take a cut like everybody else. I didn't expect that, because I don't see anybody asking for less. I see everybody wanting more and more and more, and gosh, I can't do my job, senators, because I don't have enough people and I don't have enough money, and I wonder what la-la land do they live in? Because, you know, that's where your leadership's supposed to come out. What can you make happen with what you have and what resources you have? Because there's not infinite amount of resources out there. But now, colleagues, the time has come for us to make the decision. Do we truly want an independent Office of the Public Auditor? And for all the support and confidence we placed in the public auditor that we know professionally, we may know personally. Is anyone going to come here and say, well, you know what, he hasn't been doing his job? As a matter of fact, I see there's too many audits sitting on the shelf collecting dust because there's not much happening with his findings. That's why we want to ensure the legal process is there. Is it to simply catch people from misspending money? No, it's hopefully to discourage people at the very beginning from misspending public money. Because I'll tell you what, I'm dumbfounded. If we dig just a little bit, how much we're going to find of misuse and misspending in this government. Even when it's public money. Don't even think twice about it. So I hope you, once again, colleagues, vote in favor of this bill. Support our public auditor's independence, because he needs it. I think this issue in this most recent report he's brought before us with Homeland is a very big, it's an unfortunate example. We're not talking about a few 100,000, we're not talking about 1 million here and 1 million there. We're talking a combined amount that's unaccountable for over $40 million plus dollars. Money intended for our people. And intended to be used during the time of the greatest need of our people, be it responding from a typhoon, an earthquake, whatever the case may be. And that's up on the table, and we don't even know the future of where we're going to be with that. We have the director of education coming in and telling us, the superintendent coming here and telling us that, oh, you know, we want to ask FEMA for money to build the temporary classrooms for the Simon Sanchez. We went, gosh, what's your relationship with FEMA? Are they questioning your spending? Does what is happening at Homeland that's supposed to be our key representative with FEMA, is that jeopardized? And can you imagine something as big and significant as this? And the administration didn't think, wow, we better get ahead of this story. We better get that press release out. We better take responsibility and have our correct fix of what we're going to do. They still haven't said anything. Did they say anything here 3 weeks ago? A little over 3 weeks ago we were here. When they were asked the question, are there any other perhaps outstanding obligations, government of Guam, that we may need this money for? Our two directors that got those humongous pay raises? You know, for all the criticism I've gotten attacks that, because you know what, I'm not anybody that's going to be the fan, right? 30 grand, wow, to do the same exact job. Darn, I missed that train. And what did they say, people of Guam? No. No and no. Do you think they had knowledge of this? Do you think FEMA just sent that formal letter a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, by the way, you owe us. You've misspent. You have no books to account. Do you think that just popped up? Like, you know, we're supposed to believe the budget director tell us, oh, I didn't know that in a week and a half we're going to have 15 more million in the coffers. We're not keeping daily count of the revenues coming into the government of Guam. We don't know. We didn't know. Oh, there, yeah, the 15 million appeared, and, you know, the governor signed the bill. After they came here and told us, no, there's no money. No, repeatedly, no money. Wow. And we ask our people to put their government in our hands because, wow, we're going to make the better decision for them. So think about that, colleagues. Do you want the burdens and missteps of the administration to be on you? Because it ain't the administration's going up for election in a few months. It's going to be all of us here. For whatever office you're running for. All of us are going to be held accountable. So you need to decide, is that burden yours? If you didn't do it, do you want to take responsibility for it? Well, you sort of do when you don't return that responsibility back to where it truly belongs. And this is Adeloop's problem. And Adeloop still hasn't come out, to my understanding, unless you guys can enlighten me, to accept or acknowledge responsibility. Because they're the ones that are managing the administration. More the reason we need to ensure that the Office of the Public Accountability is independent. Because they shouldn't be cowering to anybody. They should be there doing their job and making sure the numbers add up, and when they don't, they need to bring it to light. so that either corrective action needs to be taken, or you know what? If someone needs to get prosecuted for putting their hands in the cookie jar, then so be it. So again, Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this bill and hope my colleagues do the same. Thank you.
Senator. On the motion to place veto bill number 227-37 onto the voting file, notwithstanding the objections of Imaga Hagan Guahan, Senator Blas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, like Bill 213-37, I also stand in full support and will vote and ask my colleagues for their vote for an override of Bill 227-37. And, you know, with it, if you look at both bills, or just look at this bill, 227, why was it vetoed? Why did the administration have an issue with it? What was the real reason? You know, I've heard that there possibly one of the reasons is because, you know, it's going to take about, it's a 1/4% of what the budget will be, proposed budget will be for the year. And the concern was, well, you know, that was based on what the numbers are today, and if the numbers decrease, then it's going to decrease his funding as well. Well, you know, I had a discussion with the public auditor about a week ago about that same scenario, and he said, Senator, if the government has to reduce its resources because of reduced revenues, I think it's incumbent upon for me to do the same thing. I need to work within my means. So take that excuse out. What is the other excuses? And I say excuses because that's what they merely are. They're not reasons, they're excuses. Not just over the last week, but over the last few years where there was this current auditor or the previous auditors, they've proven their value, their worth towards assuring the accountability of the government of Guam. It's the Office of Public Accountability. Its job is to ensure that the finances, the resources of the government of Guam, there's accountability for it. Its independence for its finances, it's to ensure that, first off, there's no persuasion or assuasion or otherwise that they're going to do their job despite who sits at Adelup, or even who sits in here, or who sits in different agencies. I've not once seen this auditor, nor any other auditor public auditor that have sit in that position, that has restrained from being able to do their jobs. Because of persuasion, affiliation, or otherwise. That's what we should expect. I was dumbfounded. I thought that, you know, that this was a common sense bill. And then for it to be vetoed, calls to the question, why? Why was it vetoed? What harm will it do? Unless the harm is that it'll show the frailties, it'll show misgivings, it'll show the misappropriations, it'll show the misuse, it'll show the misguidance that's being taken by the entity or the entities that are being investigated, being audited. And you know, the one thing that I've seen too is it's not all the audits are bad. If you're going to take it from the sense of the word of, oh, we found a mistake, oh, we found a problem. He was just as equal to be able to show where the strengths are. To assure the public that the way the money was spent is being spent the way it's supposed to be spent. But let's go back to what has happened over the last 2 weeks. It's kind of interesting. And I have to agree, the timing is almost peculiar. And you know what I find very interesting? It wasn't his fault. As a matter of fact, this administration received that FEMA report on Homeland Security and Civil Defense about 2 weeks before the public auditor came out with his report. At least 2 weeks. They've known, they knew what the substance of this report was going to be, was going to contain, as far back as November of last year. They knew that they were being audited or they were going to be subject to an audit in March of last year. There was even at one point in time a suggestion that was provided that, look, in order so that let's get in front of this. Let's tell the people of Guam as to what is happening. Let's put out a press release so that we can start to answer this, so that we can assure the public that we're doing the best that we can. And we're going to admit to what the mistakes we've done. As far as May of last year. But silence. And had it not been for the report that came up from the Office of Public Accountability on an audit that he had conducted as a result of the information that he was being provided by FEMA, what do you think would have happened? We would have not known about it. We would have not known that there was at least $34 million in question costs. We would have not known about the dysfunctionality of an emergency management system that we rely on in case of emergencies. We would have not known about $8 million in unauthorized spending because, oh yeah, you know, guys, I hope to God we're going to get to this. There's $8 million that was spent in local monies that this body didn't appropriate, and where did it come from? We would have not known that there's a restriction on being able to draw down emergency management funding to be able to fund the daily functions of emergency management on Guam. So it's being basically supplemented by local funds, of which we didn't authorize, because nobody told us. They had 2 weeks, at least. And in the 2 weeks, I asked to members of the administration when they came before us, is there anything that we should know about? Is there any spending? Is there any areas of concern that we may have to address? Or we may have to hold back on some funding so that we can help to address it? And each time I asked was no. You know what? And I'll admit, those questions were purposeful. I knew. But I wanted to give them the opportunity to say that, and I didn't want to I wanted to give that investigation, the inquiry, the audit inquiry done by the Office of Public Accountability, the opportunity to complete itself. And then we have this veto. Interesting. What are we hiding? What is the fear in providing the auditor the tools and the autonomy and the funding that he needs? The funding that that office needs. Let's take the personalities out. Ask yourself that. When this bill comes up for an override, and your name is called, and you have to give a yea or nay, ask yourself that. Why was it vetoed in the first place? Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Again, I stand in full support of the override of Bill 227-37.
Si Diyos Masi, Senator. On the override, Senator Taitagui, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the last two of my colleagues talking on the matter, I mean, I can't say it any better. Maybe I can go into more simple terms for those who are listening. The OPA came in front of us and testified in favor of Bill 227, and justly so. They need the assistance to ensure that they have the eyes on the government. You know, if you come to think about it, it's almost like a fourth, government, a branch of government. Because they're accountable for the people's money. Your money. That's what they're accountable for. The OPA said it so very well during the public hearing. I just want to read this real quick. We begin this year with 17 audit engagements and plan to engage in 6 more as we continue to oversee 27 financial audits and address procurement appeals. So it's not just the audit, but they also deal with appeals, and that could be very lengthy. We anticipate added demand for our productivity as the year progresses, and we intend to address these demands in as much as our resources will allow. Although we are working aggressively to achieve these goals, we cannot ignore the fact that our budget for the next fiscal year is subject to the will of this body. The passage of Bill number 227-37 and the codification of the OPA's annual budget guarantees our ability to serve the public interest and honor the public trust with objectivity, professionalism, and accountability without vulnerability. Without vulnerability, I say again. to the political whims of any legislative body or administration. Madam Speaker, I don't know about you, but there's a lot of us, we balance our checkbooks maybe once a month. Some people take like 2-3 months before they balance their checkbook. And sometimes when you do that, you either find out that, oh my gosh, I'm short, I've overexpended, or like, oh, lo and behold, I do have some extra money that's there. So if you think about the OPA and their responsibility, they come up with even finding funding that we knew nothing about that can actually help our agencies. When we fall short, being able to appropriate to them. It all works for a win-win situation. But when we tie the OPA's hands, we can't have that accountability. We can't find where there's money that's left over from another agency that hasn't been spent and sitting there doing nothing, versus the one that my two colleagues were talking about, where we're finding out federal funds have been misspent, or money that's been used that has not been appropriated by this body. And the law clearly says that any spending from the general fund must be appropriated by this body. Well, guess what? We're finding out that that's not true. You know, a lot of us rely on DOA and BBMR to give us answers about our financial situation. But to confirm that, we always go back to the OPA and look at their audits. Because we all know that sometimes DOA or BBMR doesn't give us those answers, or they did and it's not true. Okay, let's just say they lie. So this is the opportunity for us to fund an agency where they're not beholden to this body or the administration. It's a two-way street here. We need to arm our Public Accountability Office to have those checks and balances that everybody talks about. Checks and balances. And if you believe in that and transparency, like everybody has said, then you'll vote on this override. You'll give the OPA the ability to do their job without any duress or their hands tied or worried about them not getting their budget because they found something I call shenanigans going on, even in this body. So let's give them that opportunity. And another reason, too, is they need this funding because they're losing their accountants that are there right now. We need to arm the OPA because they're dealing with the people's money, not yours individually. It's the people's money. And that's what you're arming him to do, to be accountable for that. So I ask my colleagues, please support the override for Bill 227-37. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator. On the motion or override of Bill 227, is there anyone else who would like to be recognized on that motion? If not, then the sponsor may close on the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I don't have too much to add. I certainly appreciate my colleague, Senator Blas, Senator Tello, speaking in favor of the override. And I think we've made as clear a point as we could make about the need to ensure the independence of the Office of Public Accountability. Just by the very nature of the work they do, they should be able to do that without any type of influence, political or otherwise. So with that, Madam Speaker, again, I reiterate my motion to place Bill 227-37 in the voting file in spite of the governor's veto. Thank you.
Si Dios más. Senator, on that motion to place Bill 227-37 COR on the voting file, notwithstanding the objections of Imagahagan Guahan, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Pursuant motions, is there any other motion? If not, then we'll proceed with the legislative concurrence. In legislative concurrence, Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedus Masi, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Maritime Transportation, Air Transportation, Parks, Tourism, Higher Education, and the Advancement of Women, Youth, and Senior Citizens the nomination of Louis R. Baza to serve as a member of the Port Authority of Guam Board of Directors with the recommendation to report out only.
There's been an objection on the motion to place to the voting file the nomination of Louis R. Baza. All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion fails. Majority Leader, you are recognized under legislative concurrence. Or Senator San Augustine, you are recognized under legislative concurrence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on General Government Operation and Appropriation the nomination of Kathy O. Catling to serve as a member of the Civil Service Commission with the recommendation to do confirm.
On the motion to place a nomination of Kathy Catling onto the voting file, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you're recognized under legislative concurrence.
I got one more. One more.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place the nomination of Cynthia Kube to serve as a member of the Guam Board of Equalization with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Sedus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning the nomination of Juno Yoon to serve as a member of the Guam Banking and Insurance Board with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized under legislative concurrence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning the nominations of Elizabeth T. Fisher and to serve as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board with a recommendation to do confirm.
On the nomination of Elizabeth T. Fisher, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Sedus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning the nomination of John G. Elau to serve as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, on the nomination of John Elau to be placed in the voting file, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning the nomination of Marie P. Lazama to serve as the Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion to place a nomination of Marie Lazama to the voting file, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on General Government Operation and Appropriation the nomination of Rosemarie Azuzu Morales to serve as member of the Civil Service Commission with the recommendation to do confirm.
On the motion to place the nomination of Rosemarie Azuzu Morales to the voting file, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Barnett, you are recognized under legislative concurrence.
Si Dios más, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Education, Public Safety, and the Arts the nomination of Lulene C. San Augustine to serve as a member guidance counselor representative of the Guam Commission for Educator Certification with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion to place the nomination of Lulene C. San Augustine to the voting file, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. All right. We are now in the second reading file. We begin with Bill number 6-37 COR. Senator Parkinson, you are recognized.
Buenas Nahafaday. Thank you, Madam Speaker. To my esteemed colleagues, to the people of Guam, Bill number 6-37, an act to add a new Article 26, Chapter 12 of Title 10 Guam Code Annotated, aimed at ending workplace discrimination against employees for cannabis use outside of their work hours. The rationale behind this bill is grounded in fairness, science, and the recognition of our changing societal norms. Recreational cannabis has been legal on Guam for 4 years.
I'm sorry, Senator. Can we just begin with the motion to place on third reading?
Oh, my apologies, Speaker. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to add Bill number 6-37, an act to add a new Article 26, Chapter 12 of Title 10 Guam Code Annotated relative to ending discrimination and employment use of cannabis to the third reading, and I'd like to discuss.
All right, is this as substituted and amended by the committee?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, on that motion, we will hear debate. Please proceed.
So one of the rationales behind this bill is grounded in the fairness, science, and recognition of our changing societal norms. Recreational cannabis has been legal for 4 years, and it is high time that our employment practices reflect this reality. We do not subject our employees to tests for alcohol, which is a legal and potentially more impairing substance. Yet we continue to test for cannabis, a substance that is equally legal and often used responsibly by many in our community. One of the primary goals of this legislation is to eliminate necessary barriers to employment. According to recent data, Guam had over 124,000 working-age residents in 2021, with more than half of them not employed. By ending pre-employment cannabis testing, we can open the doors to job opportunities for many capable individuals who are currently sidelined. I want to be perfectly clear. This bill does not advocate for cannabis use at the workplace or compromise any safety standards. It specifically allows for exceptions where safety is paramount, such as in law enforcement, transportation, and positions requiring federal compliance. Our aim is not to undermine workplace safety, but to ensure that off-duty behavior, which is legal and does not impair the work performance, is not unjustly penalized. Furthermore, the current testing methods of cannabis are outdated and do not accurately measure impairment. THC, the active component of cannabis, can remain detectable in the body long after its effects have worn off. You can partake in cannabis over your Christmas break, and up to 3 months plus later, you could still test positive for cannabis. This leads to a false assumption of impairment and possible repercussions professionally and personally, which is neither fair nor scientifically valid. And I believe this takes our government in the wrong direction. We do not need to be growing our government so that they can legislate and interfere in our day-to-day lives if we are being responsible. By passing Bill 6-37, we are also aligning with the progressive policies seen in other states, such as Nevada and New York, which have successfully implemented similar laws without adverse effects on workplace safety or productivity. These states have recognized that responsible adult cannabis use should not be a barrier to gainful employment. In conclusion, this legislation is a step towards modernizing our employment practices, promoting fairness, and eliminating unnecessary barriers to employment. It is about respecting the rights of our residents, the individuals, while ensuring that our workforce remains robust and competitive. I urge my colleagues to support Bill 6-37 and take a stand for a fairer, more equitable Guam that stands for freedom. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Parkinson. Are there anyone wishing to speak on the main motion? Main motion. Senator San Augustine, I recognize you at this time.
I just want to ask a simple question of the author.
Sure.
While I was trying to look up
Please
the bill.
proceed.
I'm not against the bill up front. Okay, let's start with that. Just wanted to know, who does that apply to when you say no testing? No cannabis testing? Is it just GovGuam, or you're talking about you're going to tell a private industry that you cannot test for? I mean, that's up to them, what they want to test, but if it's for GovGuam, then I can understand. Just wanted to ask that question.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Will, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I'd like to answer that question. So in the law as written, the bill as written, the Act does not apply to applicants or employees hired for positions that require a federal government background investigation or security clearances. And this does not affect any federally sensitive positions.
Thank you, Senator Parkinson. Senator Joe, does that help?
No, I understand when you come to federal, GovGuam can't tell the federal government what to do. I'm only asking, does this bill apply to private companies? That's really the gist of my question. I know GovGuam, if you pass it, then it's GovGuam-wide.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator will you answer that?
Yes. Just to clear it up in the definitions, the use of the word employers in this act includes any individual, partnership, association, corporation, business, trust, legal representative, government entity or instrumentality, or any organized group of persons acting directly or indirectly in the interest of an employer in relation to an employee, but shall not include the United States government or employees engaged in contracts with the federal government. So yes, it does apply to the private sector as well, as defined in Section H, which was added by the committee.
Thank you, Senator Will. Senator Joe San Augustine, will that suffice?
It suffices, but if I own a company, GovGuam's not going to tell me how to run my company. I just thought I'd make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just as a point of information.
Please state your point of information.
The bill as intended is really just as a mechanism for the employees to protect themselves. So if a public employer or a private employer does not make these accommodations or is found to be discriminating, this gives the individual a legal remedy through the courts to pursue justice and is not necessarily a mandate on the employers themselves.
Thank you, Senator Parkinson, for that point of information. On the main motion, if not, Legislative Secretary, could you please?
On the bill, anyone on the bill? Minority Leader Blas, followed by Vice Speaker Munya Barnes.
I will. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker,
Madam Speaker, if I may, I'm sorry, Senator.
Sure.
Do you have a point of information?
A point of information. I'm looking at a substituted version here without a letter H. And then I'm seeing that there is another substituted version out there that I have one without. And
Okay,
then
we'll
there's
take a brief recess to make sure
just to
everyone
make
has
sure
the right copy.
bill. Okay, thank you.
All right. We're back from recess. Senator Blas, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, first off, I appreciate and I recognize the efforts done by the good author of the bill. And, you know, you're right. I mean, there are certain things that as a result of the legalization of cannabis, that it takes time to be able to change and to amend some of the laws that are in existence. And I appreciate the effort. That said, however, Madam Speaker, I mean, there are some concerns that I have with regards to the nomenclature, the words that are used. And, you know, when I go to page 2, line 6, starting with line 6, subsection 2 here says an employer required drug screening test that has found the person to have non-psychoactive cannabis metabolites in their hair, blood, urine, or other bodily fluids. I guess the concern here and the necessity here would be to be able to define non-psychoactive cannabis metabolites. You know, Madam Speaker, as an individual who at one point in time did consulting, major consulting for drug-free workplace programs, and then fully knows basically the breakdown. First off, drug test doesn't test for various cannabis metabolites. It tests for tetrahydrocannabinol, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. So, two questions come to mind when you look at subsection 2 on this. It says, an employer required drug screening tests. Is this referring to a pre-employment, or can this also be referred to a post-accident, post-event test? Because a post-accident, post-event test is an employer-required drug screening test. And don't we want to know if a person is involved in an accident and rule out any possibilities of any substance or otherwise that could have contributed to this accident? Secondly, it says in line 15, this act does not apply to applicants or employees hired for positions that require federal government background investigation or security clearance in accordance with regulations issued by the United States Department of Defense pursuant to Part 117 of Title 32 of the Guam Code of Federal Regulations, or equivalent regulations applicable to other agencies. That's a broad term. Or equivalent regulations applicable to other agencies. Because other than the Department of Defense, I can tell you clearly that many of our truckers on this island, as part of their pre-employment and continued employment, are required by the Department of Transportation. It's a DOT requirement, not so much a DOD requirement. Does that negate this? And lastly, I appreciate the concern that was brought on by the good senator from Jigo with regard to how far this bill intends to expand the prohibition. And I'm not a big fan of being able to tell the private sector what it needs to do. And I have issue with that. But then there's a catch-22 in that same portion of subsection H, where it says, but shall not include the United States government employers engaged in contracts with the federal government. What kind of contracts are you talking about? Because a contract can be operational in nature or administrative in nature, but it's still a contract. So, as broad as it is, I think it's too broad. And again, I understand, the other thing too is when it says the person's, line 1 on page 2, the person's use of cannabis off the job and away from the workplace. Off the job and away from the workplace can be determined as on the way to work. Then what? So as well-intentioned as the bill is, and I think that if there is some corrections and some clarifications into some of these areas, and mind you, there's not enough time today to be able to make some of these corrections that are necessary. I have issue with some of the sections that I'm concerned. First off, of the broad overreach of the government and of the broad definitions and the inferences that are made. So, you're right. He's right. You could use marijuana 3 months ago and it'll still show up. But that's I'm not comfortable that it's captured in the fashion that the author perceives it to be. And I caution that if we move with the bill as written, without some clarification in some of these areas, it may not carry out what this bill intends to carry out. I'll sit and listen to the rest of the presentations by my colleagues, but in the same time, let me see if I can find some areas here that we can help to improve the language. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, Senator Fisher, you're right. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, the Vice Speaker. Senator Fisher, do you mind? Yeah. Vice Speaker, you're recognized. I didn't see your hand.
Ananasiduous, Madam Speaker. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. And I want to thank the sponsor of Bill number 6-37 for letting me co-sponsor this important piece of legislation that will update our labor laws to reflect our territory's approval of medicinal and adult use cannabis for our residents. Madam Speaker, for the record also, I was the main author with Senator Aileen Yamashita, who did the cannabis, medical cannabis legislation. Despite qualified patients and adults over the age of 21 being allowed to consume cannabis since at least April of 2019, this government has done little to enact protections against choosing to use this substance in the privacy of their own homes, just like the way we treat alcohol and tobacco. I applaud my good friend from MTM for putting this on our agenda so that those who responsibly use cannabis, meaning as the law allows and not in the workplace, will not mean they cannot otherwise get a job. But just like other good bills that have come before this body, Madam Speaker, in order to make these reforms workable and not lead to unintended consequences, this is not a simple prohibition on all testings for cannabis in an employee's system. Let's be absolutely clear about what the bill calls for, and that's an end to testing that only measures a person's past use of cannabis, because that's precisely what most drug tests used today do. They measure the substances left in your body that are metabolized from the drug. It is not like a test for alcohol that proves that you are actively drunk. When someone tests positive for cannabis, and when they take pre-employment tests, or when they are suspected of being high following a work accident, that result does not prove they are actually under the influence of cannabis. In fact, depending on how often you partake in cannabis, these drug tests can show a positive result even though the last time you smoked cannabis was 2 days ago, up to a month ago or longer if you are a medical patient who uses it daily. But we also live in a real world with goals that need to be balanced with legal limitations and mandates, Madam Speaker. And with that in mind, the measure includes a number of provisions that will ensure business and government agencies who must continue to use the most common types of cannabis tests can and won't be punished for doing what they must to preserve federal funds, contracts, and certifications. These are examples of the commitment to compromise shared by the author and myself, and I hope that these pragmatism can be met by the majority members of this body to approve Bill 6. Madam Speaker, for the benefit of the public, here is a list of employees, employers, and industries that are exempt from the protections offered in this bill, meaning nothing will change for them should this measure become law. Anyone who is required to undergo a federal background investigation, anyone who needs to obtain a federal security clearance, any employer who must have a restrictive drug-free workplace, any employer who must test due to federal law or regulation, anyone employed in the construction and building trades. And thanks to the feedback from Guam Waterworks Authority in the testimony submitted after this bill's hearings, I will be proposing an amendment to expand the industries exempted to include both of our government's utilities. Madam Speaker, we received other feedback during the course of hearing this measure, and I'd like to take the time to allay the concerns of the organizations and agencies who testified on this bill during the course of its 2 hearings, as I feel the legislation itself handles the issues that were brought up. Firstly, this bill does not allow workers to use cannabis while on the job, nor does it prohibit employers from randomly testing or testing with cause workers for active cannabis intoxication. Second, Madam Speaker, this bill does not jeopardize any employer that is funded through federal grants, including government agencies, because they are specifically exempted from this legislation. Nor does it force any employer to forego getting mandatory insurance or force them to break any policies or conditions laid out in that insurance contract. To put it simply, Madam Speaker, if the federal government, its laws or regulations, mandates or obligations to require you to proceed with an antiquated testing, you can. But this bill will help tremendously for tens, thousands of workers filling thousands of positions that do not share the same limitations or face any conflicting drug policies. Madam Speaker, Mr. Robert Koss, lay representative from the Guam Federation of Teachers, testified to the unfair treatment he's seen as a result of the antiquated drug tests used for cannabis. He told my committee, quote, "I have seen the injustice day after day when I go to Civil Service Commission. Here, somebody could have a beer 3 weeks ago and not fear of losing their job, but smoke a marijuana cigarette 3 weeks ago at home and you lose your job. Not just lose your job, good luck getting another in the government of Guam, because you seem to get blackballed or blacklisted for that." So in his words, the current law makes it legal for adults over 21 to consume cannabis, but, quote, "it'll cost you your job." And that nonsensical premise that doing something legal can cost you your job goes to the very heart of this proposal. The status quo, Madam Speaker, is not fair, and it must change to meet the current landscape of the local cannabis laws. Madam Speaker, before I'm going to go ahead and propose the amendment, but I just want to clear for the record again that this is also to clarify, this bill does not prohibit cannabis testing. It merely requires employers with exemptions to use a test that doesn't only measure metabolized cannabinoids, meaning employers without an exception will have to use a test that shows they are high on the job. So the amendment, Madam Speaker, that I will introduce is on page 2, lines 13 and 14. It is in the Google Drive, and it says it's to amend the bill to read C. This act does not apply to an employee in the building and construction trades, comma, the Guam Water Works Authority or the government water and wastewater utility, and the Guam Power Authority or government power utility. This language, Madam Speaker, was proffered by Guam Water Works Authority, and although I believe they have many federal grants and mandates that would exempt them from this measure as a partner collaborating in good faith with them, I am attempting to include them and the Guam Power Authority as specifically exempted agencies, which I personally hope will allay any concerns from our power and water utilities. For the record, Madam Speaker, Guam Water Works Authority is the only utility that submitted testimony on this measure, but I believe the exemptions already included would cover other positions in telecommunications, solid waste disposal, and at RC and airports. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me time to offer this amendment, and I hope my colleagues can support this effort as it was requested in the public hearing. Jesus Masi.
Madam Speaker.
Vice Speaker, just to confirm, the amendment only says the Guam Waterworks Authority or the Government Water and Wastewater Utility and the Guam Power Authority or Government Power Utility.
Yes, ma'am, that is what the amendment states at this moment, and it can be.
Not
I'm
the
open.
telecoms or the seaport.
No, I'm just saying that,
All right.
those already have provisions.
Okay. On the amendment, Senator
Madam
Sanax.
Speaker, just to make sure we get it correct, it's not line 13 or 14, it's actually line 25, 26. When you go to the substitute bill, I know that 13, 14 would have been the first. I'm looking at it on the web, unless the clerk can tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, we're the clerk's version of the bill. It's on lines 13 and 14.
It is? Okay, well, I'll take a look at it.
It's on page 2, Madam Speaker.
Yes, just want to make sure anyone needs a hard copy of the bill? We have some hard copies, let me know. Of the sub-bill as amended by committee. All right, on this amendment, is there anyone who'd like to be recognized on the amendment? Senator Blasio, I recognize on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I can rise in support of this amendment. But as such, it says this act does not apply to an employee in the building and construction trades, the Guam Waterworks Authority, or the Government Water and Wastewater Utility, and the Guam Power Authority or Government Power Utility. Now, does that mean it does not apply to, it says to an employee in the building and construction trades in GWA or GPA? Does that mean that this doesn't apply to every employee in the building and construction trade? Does that mean that that this act does not apply to every employee from GWA and GPA? That's the first question. Next question is, okay, what about in the education industry? How about the education profession? What about in the transportation profession? What about them? What about in the health profession? What about them? Okay? Here, you're talking about people who do things outside. What about the people that work with other people? Oh, you can, I would appreciate, but I think it also, again, be very cautious, be very careful, because you're saying every employee to an employee in the building, construction, GWA, GPA. That includes your secretary.
Would you like me to respond right now?
In due time. Okay, and then so again, I understand, I appreciate. It's just that as much as we want to be able to restrict, or we want to be able to define, we're broadly defining in this fashion. I understand what the concerns here, the building and construction, because you're dealing with, in some cases, dangerous equipment. And I remember many years ago, I used to say that, I can justify the secretary because she has to use a stapler. If she staples your hand to the paper, but, people saying, no, that's going a little too far. Well, I think this goes a little too far. Okay? So, the two things. I think there has to be clarity as to what kind of employee in these industries that this act does not apply to. And secondly, I think that we're missing other industries that this act should not apply as well. Okay? Again, it's very easy to say on the government side, the reason why we didn't include these because they receive federal funds, blah, 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 and they need to. And I remind you, there are parochial or there are outside government entities that do just the same jobs. And are we going to permit them? Again, maybe be very careful. Thank you very much, ma'am. And then I'll give my sister an opportunity to explain it.
All right. Would the sponsor yield?
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, I will try to yield to that. My reading is that it would apply to every employee covered by that list, and education employees and others who have drug testing as a condition of federal grants or regulations would be exempt. I do know, Madam Speaker, that there is another amendment on the floor that may also answer some of his inquiries, so I hope that helps. Sidus Masi.
Sidus Masi, Vice Speaker. On the amendment, is there anyone else who would like to be recognized? Senator Taitakui, you're recognized on the amendment.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. You know, I had an amendment that I wanted to proffer, and I noticed that it was very similar to this amendment. So working with the, of course, this amendment came first before mine, so working with the author of this amendment, I thought it might be best to just make an amendment to the amendment. So if everyone can look on the Google Drive, you'll see an amendment under TTT. So I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment, Madam Speaker. And this amendment would read, actually, it would come after or before, it would come before the Guam Water Works Authority on this amendment. So it would read, well, let me go ahead and do the original. This act does not apply to employees in the building and construction trades, and this is where my amendment would come into the amendment. Law enforcement officers, firefighters, emergency responders, and other positions where public safety is a concern, medical professionals involved in direct patient care, public transportation operators, teachers, child care providers. Then it would go the Guam Water Works Authority, the Government Water and Wastewater Utility, and Guam Power Authority and Government of Guam Utility. Madam Speaker, there are states currently right now, Arizona and Connecticut law, that prohibits discrimination on the basis of medical marijuana patients. I'm talking about patients. Maine and Nevada are the only states that anti-discrimination for recreational users is the only states so far. But Madam Speaker, all those other states do have exemptions, especially Nevada, who has the law that doesn't discriminate against the recreational use of marijuana, many of them on the medical side. But even Nevada, with recreational, has exemptions to their law. And that exemptions are emergency medical workers, firefighters, and other positions where public safety is a concern. And most states have this exemption. I understand the intent of the legislation. You have an individual who has a condition, let's say epilepsy, let's say sleep apnea, seizures. They take medication, certain medication, but yet when they go after these particular positions and when they test, they still get hired. Then you have individuals who don't want to use these type of medications because it damages the liver, the kidneys. It just doesn't allow you to function very well. And they found that a dose of marijuana or cannabis eases that pain and still gives them the ability to feel like they're going for a healthier choice. But unfortunately, these types of medications that are used with cannabis are epilepsy, sleep apnea, PTSD, nausea from chemotherapy, and other medical conditions. Use cannabis instead of pharmaceutical drugs. And they still can function. My biggest concern was the testing. The testing of an individual if they are under the influence during working hours. How do we do that with cannabis? And that was something I brought up. There is a company called Hounds Lab. About a year ago, they released a cannabis breath testing mechanism, similar to alcohol testing, what the cops use to see if you're impaired. And actually, even an employer can use this type of testing when it comes to alcohol to test their employee. So finally, they've been coming out with this particular apparatus that will test cannabis through breathalyzer within the last 2 hours. So if an individual has been at work, started work at 8 o'clock, they take a breathalyzer test, 2 hours later, and it comes out positive, that's basically they are under the influence and that they failed the test. You can actually test now for cannabis, people under the influence. However, though, it's still, some people say it's not always accurate. Not always accurate. But now there is a device that can test it. I don't know if if this bill has the votes, to pass. But I want to ensure that, at least this amendment that covers the concern, even at the last speaker, bringing up on when it comes to medical professionals. At least to put this amendment in to cover those areas. So that's my amendment to the amendment, which is to include law enforcement officers, firefighters, emergency responders, and other positions where public safety is a concern, medical professionals involved in direct patient care, public transportation operators, teachers, child care providers. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and I hope my colleagues at least support something like this, because this would bring a little bit more comfort to some of those who probably doesn't want to see this bill pass, but it may pass. So let's put that safety mechanism in there. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Taitakui. On the amendment, there's an amendment now to the amendment. So on the Taitakui amendment to the Munya Barnes amendment, Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I promise it would be short. The intent is proffered by the senator from Tamuning, just reinforces what the intent of the bill is. So I really support the amendment to my original amendment. So, Sizus Masi.
Sizus Masi, Vice Speaker. On the Taitakui amendment to the amendment, is there anyone who would like to speak to that amendment to the amendment? Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think therein lies the challenge, is have we covered everything? And are we covering things that are already covered in what we look at as our designated positions within the government of Guam that should cover those critical positions? But, when I first saw this bill and I saw the reference to construction workers, I thought, oh, construction workers can't test for cannabis. they can't be on cannabis? Why construction workers only? That was my question. So I don't necessarily know, and I'm not going to object to the amendments. I'm sure at this point you can throw everything in the kitchen sink, and then we'll still wonder, did we address all the critical positions? Because, you know, I don't know. I'm not in the private sector. I'm kind of curious how private sector managers out there are going to try to figure out how to deal with this, and probably wonder how they're going to deal with the liability, and probably wondering what their insurance will and will not cover. And I think of the government of Guam and having managed some pretty major operations in this government. And yes, we do have the designated positions, and you're not supposed to be on pot, weed, whatever you want to call it. But let's ask ourselves, I mean, if cannabis has an effect on your body, is it good or bad? Maybe for some it's good, maybe for some it's bad. And I voted for medical cannabis when it came up, Madam Speaker. I thought, yeah, that's... I've seen family members who've gone through cancer. And certainly the opportunity to provide relief to suffering such as that, those type of illnesses, I understand. But now we're getting to where the author wants to present this bill overall, and now we're trying to figure out what positions do we say, oh, you can't be on it, even if you took it 30 days ago. Whether it was in your brownie or you inhaled it, smoked it. Can't be if you're Guam Waterworks Authority, Guam Power Authority. But every other position in Gov Guam, they say it affects your decision-making capabilities, your memory. If it calms your stress, does it cause anxiety? People, I guess, have different responses. I'm no expert on cannabis, but if it alters our awareness or perception, or whatever we think our perception is of reality, is that the question of what we want for our employees in the government of Guam? And I'll tell you, ask our people out there about their response to customer service in the government of Guam. Excellent? Satisfactory? I'll tell you my encounters with Gov Guam as a citizen out there, I've had my moments. So I don't know which position you think is not as important, where we need all our people to be coherent as much as possible to what work they're doing. Is it only if you're shuffling paperwork? Doesn't matter what you're shuffling, doesn't matter what you're writing, what you're typing, what you're auditing? Why don't we include the auditors on that too, huh? I'd want them to have full awareness of their capabilities when they're auditing. Don't you? Where does it begin and end? Because you don't have the same ability to test for cannabis like alcohol. Alcohol, you can determine whether or not someone's intoxicated. You can determine the level of intoxication in their system. Maybe to determine how recently they might have consumed that volume of alcohol. Someone's got crystal meth in their system, you can test for crystal meth. I don't know if it's a question of degree. Did they take it 5 hours ago? Is it in their system for 10 days, 12 days, 1 hour? Cannabis, okay, they did it in the privacy of their life at home yesterday. Did they smoke it 5 seconds before they got out of their car, walked into their office, walked into the legislature or the session hall? I'm not sure about the testing for that, because it's in my experience, I don't know that we can test for that. And more importantly, Madam Speaker, the whole idea, and I'll bring this up when I get to the main bill, maybe I'll wait till I talk about the main bill. But if it does alter our ability, because not everybody has a great response to smoking, or I don't know, I guess you can put it in your brownies, whatever. But if you think this is just a no problem, we're all cool with this stuff, I don't know that that's the case, because people in Guam never got to vote on this issue. We went from medical cannabis and the list of concerns with medical cannabis and the need for medical cannabis to like it's free for all. That includes Guam. You can't, because cannabis is being discriminated against. Oh my goodness. Let's not discriminate. Poor cannabis, oh my goodness, is being discriminated. We got to protect cannabis from being discriminated against. And now we put the burden on the people of Guam. Now we're putting the burden on the employers out there in the private sector who probably haven't yet to register the impact of this legislation on their operations and their ability to properly manage their business. And sure, we'll say, oh, all those DOT positions, you drive a truck, whatever. What about all the other jobs in the private sector? Their cognizant awareness of what they're doing doesn't matter. It's not important. Their decision-making ability is not important for whatever job they may be doing. Doesn't matter. Decision-making capabilities, memory doesn't matter. You know, there's a reason when we grew up, you know, man, you're getting stoned. I kind of interpret, well, getting stoned doesn't mean I'm all here, right? I'm kind of... So I'm not going to object to the addition, but colleagues, I don't know if you think you got everything covered. Because I'm still dumbfounded by, you know, we can't have construction workers smoking cannabis. I don't know, maybe they're going to take the hammer and hit their thumb. But if you're assuming that that doesn't matter because it only involves physical activity or their job is physically related, I'm asking what about their mental capabilities with the work that they're doing? And the decisions that they're making and what they are and are not processing. In the guts of government, private sector, I can't even begin to imagine the list of burdens we've just put on the private sector on top of everything else. You know, those very terrible business people out there. What additional burdens we're adding because, you know, we don't want to discriminate against cannabis. Now we're making it even more difficult for people to ensure, employers in the government of Guam to ensure, employers in the private sector to ensure that they have employees showing up that are capably clear and cognizant and ready to work. And if there's any damage or liability, how do you measure people's decision-making skills, their behavior? How do you measure that? And think, are they on something or that's just who they are and we're just gonna, you know, go with the flow? I just think we need to be a little careful because we ain't all going with the flow. Especially, Madam Speaker, when we have a major drug problem on this island. You know, us younger ones that were younger once upon a time that are older now, that grew up back in the 70s in the time of the heroin era, we just heard about shootings and, you know, federal agent getting killed and, oh, well, that's a different world from where we were. But today, you know, people go, oh, well, you know, this is not a gateway drug. This is just, you know, hey, I want to relax. I've got stress. We've all got stress. I don't know anyone who doesn't have stress. But the idea that, you know, it's recreational, that's fine. If recreational doesn't impede and the moment you walk through the door, you're cognizant and you're functioning and your abilities are there, then yay. I don't know that things work that way. I don't know that that's automatic, that you snap in and out of stuff. So if we're thinking that we're all just so cool with this because some of us think it's, you know, we smoke it, that it's okay for all us Guam employees as long as you're not on the list because I can smoke it before I walk through the door and what the heck, it ain't going to measure any different. I'm cool. It's good. Can't test me for it. I think we need to think about what we're doing. Because when we've got issues as bad as we do and as many families as we have that are suffering with those that are addicted, and I don't know if it's choice, I don't know if it's some people that just, you know, that's just, once they get hooked, they're hooked. They harm themselves, they harm their family, they steal from their family, they steal from their neighbors, they steal from this community. And we've all been victims of it. Tell me who here who has not. And to the degree that it has permeated to almost every corner of our community right now. We had 38, I believe, unless I'm wrong by one. Young men in this community during their most productive years of their lives and their contribution to their family and this community on Guam that died. And you go, oh, this wasn't from, cannabis. It was from meth, man. Meth. But the fact that we have a drug problem, unless you want to tell me, no big deal, smoking cannabis like smoking a regular cigarette. And we had 3 women. Oh, no big deal. People die. What's the big deal? In their most productive years of their life. And we say, oh, we don't have a problem. Remember our briefing, Madam Speaker, from Dr. Nine before he left? We looked at those that committed suicide. We don't talk about suicide so much, right? We look at obituary or Lana, our family friend, we hear, oh, he just said they committed suicide. But we don't talk about it, the media doesn't cover it, because we don't want to glorify suicide on Guam. Because how many people are dying from suicide? Well, at least according to Dr. Nine's toxicology report, what was the second highest substance found in people on Guam last year that committed suicide? You want to guess? Boys and girls? So let's deal with those realities of what it is and what message during this time that we're sending out to our families out there that are harmed, to those that are actually suffering from addiction. Because, hey, maybe you can just smoke it today. Lana, I just smoke on the weekend, no big deal. I don't need it. It's nice, but I don't need it to live. I'm not addicted to it. I drink 6 beers a day, but I'm not addicted. Just, calms me down at the end of the day. I just think we need to be very mindful when we make policies that affect our people directly, and to make this seem like this is a very casual, no worries to employers, because we just dumped this burden on the people of Guam to worry about. We've dumped this burden to the employers, and not everybody out there is swimming right now in the private sector. When we come here and we make these kind of policy calls and we talk about the discrimination of cannabis, I think we need to really look at the impacts that our people are suffering as a result of addiction, assuming cannabis has no real effects, just like, chewing bubble gum. Think about that, colleagues. Think about the decisions we're making at this time with what our community is suffering from. On top of the crime that we can almost always connect the lines to drugs in this community. But we'll just say, cannabis is minor. It's like drinking. No big deal. Because cannabis is the victim here. It's being discriminated against. But the realities of what are going on outside this session hall that our people are harmed from. What do I hear from people this weekend? I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. We're sitting at a matai outside and we're talking and catching up, and what's the response? I don't feel safe. I wonder why. I think we know why. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to comment on this amendment.
Senator Brown. Senator Fisher recognized on the amendment to the amendment.
Yes, ma'am. Just procedurally, I'd like to speak on the main bill as well, but this is the amendment of the amendment, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I was very interested in the prior speaker's discussion. We are embroiled in this reefer madness, I suppose, in this legislature. Very briefly, does the prior speaker, does anyone in the body have any evidence whatsoever that cannabis use is addictive? No, it's not. It doesn't exist. Senator Blouse is going to give us a peer-reviewed study, I'm sure, to explain why it is addictive. And then, this is not the 1960s anymore. Where is any evidence that marijuana is a gateway drug to what? It is universally recognized to be a psychoactive substance that has no long-term ill effects. So thank you very much. I just wanted to speak on the amendment it's at, and I look forward to speaking on the main bill.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. On the amendment to the amendment, the Taitagui amendment, is there anyone else who would like to speak? Senator Siniclis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I go, if you don't mind, I'd like to wish my son a happy birthday. He's in Korea right now. This is his first duty station. He makes us all proud. Happy birthday. I wanted to follow on with Senator Fisher's, concern as well. The addition in the amendments, speak of the careers that I also had when I was in my other lives. I was a school counselor, an educator. I was also in law enforcement. And when I became a school counselor, that's when recreational marijuana was legalized. And consequently, I also partake in that stuff, and it's actually done me very well. I had a VA doctor who, pulled me to the side, and she goes, I'm really not supposed to tell you this, but I would rather have you take cannabis than opioids. And I was like, oh, wow, doc, can you write that down so I could probably get a prescription? She goes, no, I can't do that. But it's about this cannabis-hating mentality and all that stuff. And, if I didn't take cannabis, I don't know if I was able to come in this morning and sit through some of the discussions. I'm joking. But I suffer from chronic pain, and a great deal of our public has that too. And I don't want to restrict anybody from, a firefighter who goes through a long day of backbreaking work and then having to go home and having to medicate and choose between opioids and cannabis. I wouldn't want to do that. This bill, we're all talking, but we're not really emphasizing the responsible use of cannabis. And cannabis is not the problem that we're facing on this island. It's actually meth. My wife and I went to dinner the other week, and she goes, man, that waiter's so fast. I wonder what he's on. And I tell you, it's not marijuana. But he was a fast server, and we tipped him accordingly. But if somebody, if I was I'm an employer, I employ people, and there are other, good leaders out there. And if they found somebody to be intoxicated for any reason, for any cause, be it beer, maybe some Jack Daniel or whatever, and they saw somebody come into work in that manner, intoxicated, they secure that person. But we're talking about, so remember I was telling you I was a school counselor? I transferred from customs to be a school counselor. And had they made marijuana, recreational marijuana, earlier legal and I were to transfer, I probably wouldn't have gotten that job as a school counselor. And so I just want to, let's be rational here. Let's be reasonable. And, Menedzuk ikanaihu putiare I kalalotu that the senior zumamoket tagos in Boston. But it's cannabis helps me make it possible. So, I don't know why everybody's still hating on cannabis. And, I was a customs officer a long time ago. My dad said something to me once. He goes, Ekkari kanaimu sagof makkat. Makkari kanaimu. When I was a customs officer, I would go through people's jeans and literally look for the crumbs so I can catch them in their cannabis use. After a long study and understanding of cannabis and how we were led to believe how badly it is, and then it was legalized for medical purposes and now recreation. And I know at the time when I was doing that, marijuana was illegal, cannabis was illegal. But it was a pointless effort thing, you know? And sometimes I think back about that and I wish I would have been a lot easier on these folks, because I don't know, that's just the way it is. But you know, we're in different times. But and I have an auntie. Everybody says, "Who's this auntie you keep talking about?" Because she obviously can change your mind. Well, my auntie Tita, and this is a problem with criminalizing and just demonizing cannabis. My auntie is a cancer patient, and she's like the sweetest auntie anybody could ever have. And so I try to tell her, I said, "Auntie, you know, you need to try this medicine so you can eat." And it's not that I want to try to get her to do something illegal, or it's because I care for her, and I want her to have a dignified existence. And so but she refuses. She outright refuses, because of the demonization of cannabis throughout the decades. And if she would just take it, I'm pretty sure she would be able to live a more dignified, a more happier, more easy time during treatment. But I can't stand in support of this amendment, and I hope my colleagues understand my position on this, and so do the public. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Nicholas. On the amendment to the amendment, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized? Senator Blas. Wait, just 1 second. Yes, please proceed, Senator Blas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand in support of the amendment to the amendment. I appreciate the proffer so that it does help to identify some of the areas. I want to take the time to also I don't think there's anybody else in here. There isn't anybody else in here. It's ever been shot at because you're a part of a drug investigation? Whose lives have ever been threatened because you were part of a drug investigation? Who's ever had the responsibility of ensuring the lives of their officers, of their subordinates in drug investigations? Who's never had to confront an individual in a violent manner or in a criminal matter in a drug investigation or any investigation? I do understand the medicinal value of cannabinoids. I do understand the medicinal value of tetrahydrocannabinol. And I don't want to take away from what the bill or what this amendments or what we're trying to do here today. But let's do this under the pretense of facts. There's no test that exists to prove that an individual is high or is drunk. The test exists to prove that there is substance in an individual's body. That's what it proves. I have confronted individuals who, after just a can of beer, less than 0.03 blood alcoholic content, who couldn't hold themselves because they're drunk. At the same time, I've talked to individuals who had a 0.25 BAC and could hold their own. I've confronted individuals who have smoked less than a gram of ice and can function. And then I can confront an individual with a plate of ice and they're up for days. So no, when you take your drug test, it doesn't prove that you're drunk or you're stoned or you're high. It says you got substance in your body that could have contributed to your action. And then another thing, there's legitimate reasons that it can exist for an individual after a drug test to be positive. I recall an incident. An individual had tested positive for tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. Gave the individual an opportunity to explain. It was synthetic THC that was prescribed. A lot of people don't know this. Okay? Prior to the legalization of marijuana, there was synthetic THC that was prescribed that will show up as marijuana. Can be a legitimate reason. There could be a legitimate excuse. That person didn't lose their job because the drug in their system was legitimate. The same thing with methamphetamine. You want to test this? Get your Vicks vapor inhaler. Right before you take a drug test, inhale the vapor inhaler. In the instant that that drug enters into your system, it enters into your system as N-D-methamphetamine. It'll show positive. Is there legitimacy for that? There could be. So we shouldn't fear that the drug is found in your system if it's legitimate. What you should fear is that if you do something, if something that was detrimental, if you caused an accident, if you caused something where somebody got hurt, and you test positive, that's when you should be concerned. Marijuana addiction? Yes. It happens. It has happened. Addiction basically is defined as something that you need to continue to do despite any real reason for it. You just need to do it. So it can happen. Where I can see where the bill got value is, yes, the cannabinoids. The non-psychoactive. And there's nothing in here, and what I think what the bill should be here is that even if you are in these positions, if you've got a prescription and you're taking it as prescribed, you're taking it responsibly. There's no fear. Yes, at one point in time, marijuana was basically described as or defined as a Schedule I controlled substance, meaning no medicinal value. Very restrictive. Yeah, I agree. Maybe it was a little too, it was too restrictive. But you know, as we speak here, one of the major concerns we have here is methamphetamine. Guess what? Methamphetamine is a Schedule II controlled substance, much less dangerous according to the schedules than marijuana. That can be prescribed with very severe, with restrictions. So let's be very careful how we justify our support or lack of support or objection or based on things that we think we know. And what's wrong with making sure that it doesn't apply to these employees? I will proffer, though, one amendment to this amendment is basically where it says medical professionals involved in direct patient care. I just want to be able to delete direct. So I move to delete the word direct. So it reads medical professionals involved in patient care.
Si Jesús Masi, Senator Blas, however, our rules prohibit us from having a third amendment on an amendment to an amendment to an amendment. So perhaps the sponsor of that amendment to the amendment can incorporate that.
So I'll go ahead and register that concern and
Si Jesús Masi.
request. Okay. Well, other than that, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Other than that area, I stand in support of the amendment, to the amendment.
On the amendment to the amendment, is there anyone else who would like to speak? If not, then the sponsor, Senator Taitugui, on your amendment to the amendment, Senator Blosset raised a concern. However, we're ready for you to close on your amendment to the amendment.
Can I just take 1 minute? I'm sorry, I was distracted for just a minute to understand what he's doing. Okay?
All right, just 1 minute recess. Please make it prompt. We're back from recess. Senator Taitugui, you're recognized to close on your amendment to the amendment.
Madam Speaker, can I just ask for 1 more minute? The author of the First Amendment is stepped out just for 1 second, and we'll be right back in.
All right. Please proceed, Senator Taitugui.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, for that short recess. In closing, Madam Speaker, once again, this amendment to the amendment was proffered based on other states and jurisdictions where some of them do not discriminate against recreational, but yet they have exemptions in place. We're looking at that at all states to ensure the safety of individuals. This is an application, Madam Speaker. This is regarding an application to a job. And as I mentioned, you know, this bill will probably get passed. They might have the votes for this bill. But if it does, I want to make sure that there's some safety mechanisms in there. Madam Speaker, the amendment to the amendment that I proffered, and in talking with the prior speaker, I just want to make one change in my amendment to the amendment and take out involved in patient care, take out direct, the word direct.
Is there any objection?
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. So that being said, Madam Speaker, I ask my colleagues to support this amendment. I think this is something that, you know, if Guam is moving in the direction as what they've been doing in the mainland, and that is, you know, with their history and everything they found when it comes to dealing with cannabis to ensure the safety and well-being of the people. This is exactly what I'm doing here, just following their lead right now, because it is proven to be very helpful. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Taitakui. So the amendment, the Taitakui amendment to the Munoz-Barnes amendment has been substituted and replaced with the exact same language without the word direct. On that amendment to the amendment, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries, or amendment passes. And now we're on the Vice Speaker Munoz-Barnes amendment. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on that amendment as amended now? On the amendment, Senator Parkinson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment. I would just like to add the judiciary of Guam as an exemption to the amendment.
On that amendment, is there anyone else who'd like to speak on the amendment? The amendment to the amendment, the Parkinson amendment to the amendment, anyone who'd like to speak? If not, Senator Parkinson, you may close on your amendment to the amendment.
I'll waive close, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, there's an amendment to add the words judiciary to the Munoz-Barnes amendment. Is there any objection to that amendment to the amendment? If not, amendment passes. We're now on the Munoz-Barnes amendment again, as amended by both Senators Taitakui and Parkinson. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on the Munoz-Barnes amendment? If not, then Vice Speaker, you may close on your amendment.
Madam Speaker. I know it's lunch, but you know, just to close out on this amendment, Madam Speaker, not one word of this bill lets you be high on the job. None of the provisions say it's okay to smoke cannabis right before you come in to work, and nobody expects people to be drunk on the job. And this bill, this amendment, doesn't treat cannabis users any differently. That's the main message here. Treat cannabis users just like we treat those who drink alcohol. So, Madam Speaker, I hope they support me on the amendment as amended. Sanamasi.
On the amendment as amended, is there any objection? No objection. Seeing no objection, that amendment as amended passes. Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I move to recess until 2 p.m. today.
All right, before we recess, I'd like to remind everyone about the NCSL representative, National Conference of State Legislatures representative is here on Guam, and he's offering to meet with us at noon if you're available. All right, on that motion to recess, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, we are recessed until 2 p.m.